Hello, everybody. How are you guys? You look beautiful. This is our backup in case the microphone doesn't work.
That's right. We got to have a backup. Good afternoon. How are you? Good. You've had a great day so far. You've had a great week so far. So we'd like to thank NP Danielle for that introduction. I'm delighted to be here with all of you as a new Jack and Jill mom in the Potomac Valley chapter. Really excited about that. And as a journalist for WUSA 9 here locally in D.C., and this is the second time I've had an opportunity to interview Valerie Jarrett. We talked back in 2016 when you were launching the United State of Women Summit. 2016 was like a lifetime ago.
It feels like a bit of a lifetime ago.
It was like a lifetime ago.
A few things have happened since then.
Yeah,
Just saying.
A few things, like you've become a grandmother.
I did become a grandmother, which is very cool. Mm-hmm. Got a 3-month-old baby boy named after my daddy, so that's very nice.
What's your grandma name?
You know, when I was growing up, I had a nickname, Lally, because my name's Valerie, but I couldn't pronounce Valerie, so I named myself Lally. And I think that sounds better than grandma or grandmother, so I'm going to go back to Lally. Going back to Lally.
She also wrote a book called Finding My Voice. And I imagine that when she looks out at the audience and sees all of you filled with purpose and promise, that her trademark cup of optimism is brimming over with joy.
Truly,
brimming over
it
with
is.
Joy.
You are beautiful. Oh my gosh, if I'd only known when I was your age, nearly as much as I know now.
And we were talking because it really must be providence that you all are here this week. It really a defining moment in the presidency, around the democracy, around this conversation about the rule of law, and how you all are tapping into your own voice, learning how to advocate, and understanding the power of your voice. So we're going to talk about that today with Valerie Jarrett, who took a bit of a journey to find her own voice, and she's going to share that with you as well. You all have visited my alma mater, Howard University, a place of residence also for Valerie because of her family tree there. So we'll talk a bit about all of you've done this week, but we want to launch into this conversation because you are here to hear from one of the most influential African-American women, and I dare say women, period, in this 21st century.
Thank you, sweetheart.
So here's how we're going to do things. I'm going to start. It's going to be a two-way conversation. So Valerie and I are going to start, and then you all will have an opportunity to ask some questions that are on your heart. And there are microphones on each side of the room. Someone will keep me clued in and on time to make sure that you all have an opportunity to find your voice and elevate it in the room. Sound good? All right. So, Valerie, why don't we start? Because these young people and their parents are here this week to learn about how our legislative process works, to find their voice and advocate for issues of importance. You see many people wearing orange shirts in here. They have a voice. We have a voice, a collective voice as an organization around the issue of gun violence prevention. And these young people, I've been told, are so impressive that even some of the members that you've talked with, their staff, have said, we want to continue this conversation with these young people. They have something to say. And so you all should give yourselves a round of applause and be proud of wherever you've come from to this city to have a say in the country that belongs to all of us. So you are now transitioning in this new role to being involved and helping to launch When We All Vote. Talk to us about the goal of the organization and what it does and how we can all be part of that.
Well, thank you, Leslie, and good afternoon again. I am so happy to be here with all of you. I've been looking forward to this for weeks because you are a captive audience, and I want to talk to you about how I found my voice and what I try to do with it. So on When We All Vote, last summer, Mrs. Obama and I were talking about the last presidential election. And not just the outcome, which was profoundly disappointing, But just as importantly, the fact that 43% of eligible voters in our country did not vote. Now, I say to those of you in this room, you know what, black people have got to vote, because there were people who sacrificed mightily for us to have the right to vote. I still remember my grandmother talking about the challenges that she had, and there are still challenges today. Those of you who might be from Georgia or Texas or North Carolina, you know, they passed laws that make it harder to vote. But my attitude is, okay, but there's no better revenge than just standing in that line and waiting them out. And if they say your vote doesn't count, contest your vote. So anyway, so Michelle Obama and I were talking about, well, what can we do about the fact that 43% of the country who was eligible to vote didn't vote? And we thought, let's start an organization that's not about politics. It's nonpartisan. It's not Democrat. We're not just trying to get Democrats to vote. We're getting everybody to vote, because we think our country will be stronger and we'll be able to hold the elected officials who run for office and win more accountable if we're all voting. And the fact that you are here in Washington, in our national capital, getting involved in the legislative process, lobbying on gun violence, I hope it's showing you that you can hold people accountable. But it has to begin. Your most basic civic responsibility is to vote. So we are casting a broad net all around the country. We are going all over. We are looking for partners. We expect Jack and Jill to be a partner with us. And we want to make sure everybody who is eligible to vote votes. And for those of you who are not old enough to vote yet, make sure your parents are voting. You know, you can nag your parents. I know they nag you, but you can nag them too. And your aunts and your uncles and your older brothers and your sisters and everybody in your community. And let's change the cultural attitude about voting. And, you know, there are a lot of people who go, well, my one vote doesn't matter. You know, no, it actually does matter. There are many districts in this country that were lost by just a few votes. If you think about the last presidential election, Hillary Clinton lost by fewer than 100,000 votes out of the whole country. And she won the popular vote. And it was just in 3 states. And so you think about all the people who said, well, I'm tired, well, it doesn't matter, well, my vote doesn't matter. And then you look what's happened over the last 2+ years. It's a wake-up call. It's a real wake-up call. And the people who are oftentimes the most vulnerable are the ones that don't vote. And so part of what I want to do is encourage people to realize that the most important civic responsibility you have begins with voting. And then we go from there. But let's start with that.
So we have a room full of young people and their parents from all across the nation. And young people have really taken up the banner to lead all of us in this country on issues of education, gun violence, climate change, voting, all of these things. They're teaching all of us what we ought to be able to do. What message would you give the young people here about sort of an out-of-the-box approach to voting, voter registration, and why it's necessary for us to all understand that we're interconnected? What happens to you, happens to you, happens to you, regardless of where you live and how you live.
Well, you know what? The out-of-the-box thing is just make it fun again. Make it a part of our culture. When I was growing up, my parents took me to the voting booth with them long before I was old enough to vote. And I did the same thing with my daughter. So to the parents in the room, take your young people with you. Talk to them about why voting is important to you. Because even those teenagers that act like they're ignoring you, they're actually listening. You know you are, right? You are. And even if you just roll your eyes while you're under 18, when you get to be 18, you're going to remember all those times that you went to the polls with your parents. And I also think, particularly in this time where, this seems like a digression, but it really isn't. So when I was growing up, a long, long time ago, Walter Cronkite was a newscaster. Leslie will have heard of him. And he came on once a day, and whatever he said, we knew to be true. How do you get your news? On your phone, right? And you decide what sources of information you're going to rely upon, and you're going to decide who you friend, and you can get really comfortable in that little echo chamber of your own, where you don't ever have to talk to people who think differently than you do. So one of the out-of-box things we have to do when we're talking about voting is we have to go talk to people who aren't just in our own community, and we have to engage them in a civil way about the importance of voting and the issues. I have talked to people who've changed their minds. just because somebody sat down, looked them in the face, and had an honest conversation. And it's very hard to do that over social media. I think there should be a pause button before anybody tweets anything, like about a 2-day pause. Those are the parents, I know, those are some young people too. Because people say all kinds of dreadful things that you know you would never say if you were looking at somebody, right? Right? You know you wouldn't say that stuff. It's mean. I look at my feed. Oh my goodness, right? And I have to check myself. And the reason why I do is because you guys are watching. And I think the people who are in leadership, particularly now at a time when our leadership is a bit toxic and the discourse is unpleasant to say the least, it puts more of a responsibility on parents and grandparents and older siblings to say, as Mrs. Obama would say, when they go low, we go high.
You are someone who can actually say, I hired Michelle Robinson.
I did hire her.
Who later became the First Lady of the United States. I think we know a little bit about that story. But did you know then that you would have an imprint on what would become two of the most iconic people in this nation? Clearly something arrested you when you were talking with the woman who would become Michelle Robinson Obama and the First Lady.
So shall I tell you about how I met her? Yes. So, well, if you've read her book, and I hope you all have, then read my book, and you'll hear the same story from different perspectives, hers and mine. So we both were lawyers, and we both worked at big law firms. And after being quite miserable in my big law firm, doing what everybody else was telling me I should do, they thought it was a very fancy place to be, I finally listened to the most important voice, and that was the quiet one inside of me that drove me to public service. And Mayor Harold Washington, anybody from Chicago? All right. So you all know, first black mayor of Chicago, and he'd just been reelected. And a good friend talked me into going to city government. So I loved it. And it taught me so much about service and being available and listening to people, because your constituents are right there. You don't have to travel all the way to Washington. They had my home phone number. They knew where to find me. And so 4 years later, I was promoted to Deputy Chief of Staff, and a resume came across my desk. And across the top of the resume, somebody had written, brilliant young lawyer has no interest in being at a big law firm. And I thought, well, music to my ears. So I called Michelle Robinson in for an interview. And she walks in my office, and she's 27 years old. She's a baby. She's tall. She's elegant but simply dressed. I still can see her now, all black, hair pulled back, just a little bit of makeup on. And she shakes my hand. She looks me right in the face. And I thought, well, you kind of got a little confidence going here. She sees her resume, on my desk. She never mentions, Princeton undergrad, Harvard Law School. She tells me her story. And this is one piece of advice I give to young people when you are getting an internship or a summer job. Be prepared to be vulnerable and open up and talk about yourself. People can read your resume. That's not what's important. What's important is the feeling they get from you. And she told me about how she had the same misgivings I did about being at this big law firm and wondering, was there more to life? And she told me that her dad and her best friend had died within the last year. And she got very emotional about it. And she said, when that happened, I thought, well, there must be more to life than this. And I'm searching for a purpose and meaning. Well, I was so impressed with her, I gave her a job offer on the spot. Now, I had no authority to actually give her that job offer. But I just thought, who would turn her down? And she chuckled, and she said, like you just did. And she said, I'll get back to you. So I'm talking to her a few days later, and I said, and at this point, everybody wanted to work in the mayor's office. I wasn't used to it, and part of the interview, I'm like trying to convince her. And I'm like, I'm not used to having to work this hard to get somebody to come work here. So I talked to her a few days later, and I said, well, what about the job offer? And she said, well, we have a problem. And I said, what's our problem? She said, my fiance doesn't think it's a good idea. I said, well, who's your fiance, and why do we care what he thinks? So she laughed again and said his name was Barack Obama, and he had started, exactly. And she said he'd started his career as a community organizer on the south side of Chicago, and he was concerned about this move. And she said, would you be willing to have dinner with us and talk about it? Now, that's an odd thing to do, right? And I will say there have been many people when I tell them this story who say to me, well, why would you go have dinner with them? And I said, because I really wanted her. And I was willing to do whatever it took. But I also say this, and this is important in terms of relationships, that there's not a single decision he made in his career without her sitting right at the table too. Right? So it's a partnership. So fast forward at the end of this dinner, it was like a 3-hour dinner, and we talked about our childhoods and everything, again, making ourselves open and vulnerable. And at the end of the dinner, to your question, Leslie, I thought I was so impressed with him and with her, of course. And I said, maybe, just maybe one day he could be mayor of Chicago. So he exceeded my expectations, to say the least. But part of it wasn't him. It was not he. It was all I had known in terms of black people, reaching heights politically was mayor. I hadn't even envisioned a black president. And my parents didn't believe until election night that there could be a black president. And so it just goes to show you need to have the courage to go beyond those expectations and chart your own course, not, as I say, be shackled by the prior experiences of those who came before you. So I knew he was very special. I knew he was committed to public service. I knew he loved his fiancée. I did not know he would be president of the United States.
But you did know that once he became president, that you all had left such an imprint on each other that you wanted to commit yourself to helping him amplify his voice and helping other people find their voices.
Well, that is true. And I will say to you, when he won, we had kind of talked about it a little bit while he was running, but I was at this point a CEO of a real estate company in Chicago. I had a lot of stuff going on. I was on some corporate boards. I was chairing the board of the University of Chicago Medical Center. And so I had a life, a full life. And he said, if I win, I'm going to come at you to go to Washington. And I just kind of laughed. I was like, let's not jinx it. Let's not jinx it. So after he won, I thought about throwing my name in the hat to be his successor in the Senate. And keep in mind now, I met them in 1991, before many of you were born, I would guess. And so I've known him a long, long time, but I am several years older. I'm not going to go into how many years older, but I'm a few years older. And I have been her boss and his mentor. And so now he's saying, come work in the White House. And I said, well, I'm kind of used to being the boss of you. Just saying. I kind of like it this way, where I get to tell you what to do. And he said, well, I am going to be the president of the United States of America. I think you could come and work for that person. And I thought, you know what, you're right, I could. And I will say the greatest thrill, honor, privilege of a lifetime was to serve all 8 years in his administration. In fact, I waved goodbye when he and Michelle Obama went to the inauguration. I was still there. And Secret Service began to look at me like, girl, you got to get out of here now. It's about to be at noon, we're switching over, and you do not have the ability to be here anymore. But it was just the most extraordinary experience in some of the hardest times in our nation's history. And to be there with somebody who I not only respect, but love and adore, both he and his wife, well, it's as good as it gets.
So the young people in here may see somebody like you and go, Valerie Jarrett must have just had it all together when she was my age. She just must have known what she wanted to do, how she wanted to do it, where she wanted to go. But what is interesting and what you reveal in your book is how you were extremely shy and you had to cultivate that voice. That was not something that was built into your DNA.
Painfully shy, which you probably find hard to believe since I have not shut up since I sat down, right? But no, when I was your age and younger, I was really shy. And I think some people just temperamentally are shy. And my parents had moved all over the world. I was born in Iran because during the Jim Crow era, when my parents were in the 1950s, my dad couldn't get a job in the United States as a physician. He went to Howard Medical School, Howard undergrad, and he just there were not opportunities available for black men, black physicians the way there are today. And so he and my mom go to Iran, and I'm born there, and then we moved to London, and then he gets a job in Chicago. And when I moved to Chicago, I was so different. And I talk in the book about being bullied as a kid because I just didn't look like anybody. I had a British accent from that 1 year in Iran, just 1 year in London. 1 year is all it took. And I'm from a country nobody had ever heard of. And so I kind of withdrew into my shell, and I'm an only child. So I didn't have siblings to force me to come out of that shell. And it wasn't really until I went to work in local government that I found the way to use my voice to advocate for people who I thought didn't have a voice at the table. And I knew I'd had a great education, and my parents loved me and were a support system, and I'd worked in the law firm for 6 years. And I looked around Chicago, and I saw so many people who had not felt as though government was working for them. And I wanted to be their voice. And I, at that point, was a single mom, but I had a good job, I had health insurance, I had parents who were supportive, I had great child care. I had a whole lot going for me, and I still felt like I was hanging on by my fingertips. And so I used to think about, well, what about those working families that don't have any of that and who are really struggling hard to get by? And I wanted to be their voice. And my father used to joke when I worked at city government, he's like, well, what happened to that shy girl that used to be my daughter? I said, she's gone, she's gone. And then I learned to advocate for myself. And I had a mentor who was a black woman who looked after me and mentored me and pushed me and helped me become a better lawyer, helped me become a better advocate, reminded me about why we were working in public service, and pushed me to start to advocate for myself, and it changed my life. So that's why I like to do that.
Can we hear this? Let's trade.
So that's why I like to do that for young people. And to say to them, just because you are shy doesn't mean you always have to be shy. And I remember the first time I gave a big speech was when I was the Commissioner of Planning and Development for the City of Chicago. And nobody told me that that job required public speaking, or I wouldn't have taken it, right? And my first speech, I wrote my notes down in ink on a note card. But I got nervous, so I started to perspire. And when I got to my speech, I looked down, and my hand is full of blue ink, and everything I had wanted to say is smushed across the page. And I am mortified, right? But you know what? I got through it. I'm not saying it was the best speech I've ever given, but I got through it. And I think that's part of one of the messages in my voice in my book is that you just have to learn how to keep doing things that you are initially scared of or uncomfortable with or terrified in my case, and it gets better with practice. And you also find, well, maybe it wasn't a great speech, but I'll do it again and I'll get a little bit better, and I'll do it again and I'll get a little bit better, and then maybe I might not be so good, but then I'll do it again. And don't give up. And I think that early resilience from that experience doing something that I was very uncomfortable doing helped me come out of that shell.
You're talking about this idea, we're going to trade. You're talking about this idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and how that helps you grow. And I think another story that might be interesting to share with all of you is, so Valerie told you that she grew up in Iran, and she lived in Iran, and she lived in London, and she lived in France, and all of these exotic places where you had been and felt like you were embraced and you had found your people. And then there was a moment when your parents decided you needed to come back here to the United States to have a more full circumference experience, to find your comfortability in the African American experience here. But when you came back to this country, you thought you were going to be embraced by the very people who look like you and shared your experience in some way. But that was not the case, and that was hard for you to reconcile.
Yeah, so I go back to Chicago, which my mother calls home, and I went to school with students who just bullied me, as I mentioned a little while ago, because I was from a country nobody had ever heard of. I had this British accent. I was a couple years ahead of myself in school, and I just felt like an other. And so it gave me empathy for people who feel shut out, because here my parents wanted me to come home so that I could see what the black experience was like. And I'm like, Mom, the black kids are beating me up after school every day. but I had a big extended family, and I will say, I just learned to find my place, and it took a minute. And I think my parents didn't understand how hard it was when you feel like you're an outsider, because to them they were just going home, but to me I was going to a completely different country, and I had to learn to just make friends and be outgoing. And when I'm that shy kid I told you about, it was hard to do that. But having a family that surrounded me and a support network made it a little bit easier. I talk in my book about how my cousin, who was 6 months younger and 10 pounds lighter, would come to my rescue when I got bullied. And that was kind of embarrassing, to have her come to my rescue, but I was grateful she was there.
You still call Lauren to have your back?
She still has my back, and I still have hers now, yeah.
So you found your squad.
I have definitely my squad. And it starts with your family and friends. I was in Jack and Jill when I was your age, and it was because I went to a school that was like 98% white. And my parents, again, were like, we are going to give her an experience with young black children. They wanted me to have that.
So many of our young people are ambitious and brilliant, and we can see the light in all of you. But there is a point of development where they are that I think they might glean something from something you said to me backstage, which was that you've spent your life looking forward but never looking back. And there is this drive to be so successful, to test well, to score well, to be at the top of your class, to do this excellently, that I think sometimes young people feel this pressure to reach the bar of excellence that gets harder and harder and harder to reach. You talk in your book about how your parents said you had to work twice as hard, be 3 times as good. How do we balance this quest for excellence with our young people, with this idea that they can be present in their life experience, that they can have joy in their life experience, that they can have happiness in their life experience, and for all of the things happening around you, all the things happening in school, all the things happening in your world, that they can be okay with who they are?
Well, I think to do that, you have to ground yourself and compete with yourself and just yourself. And I learned to do that early on. I just was like, I made up my mind, I'm not going to look at who else is getting what grade. I'm just going to maximize my effort. And I remember my father in particular, like if I got a really good grade, his question would be, well, did you try as hard as you could? And if I said, well, kind of, he'd say, well, if you didn't try as hard as you could, I don't care how good your grade is. Or if I got a not great good, he'd say the same thing, did you give it your best? And if I said yes, he said, okay. Learn from what you did wrong, go back in there and do it again. And I think in this environment in particular, and I don't want to sound like I'm just totally down on social media, but I do think, having recently spoken at the American Psychiatric Institute, they are worried about mental health with your age group, the young people in the room, and particularly those of you in college when you're now away from your parents. And they think that social media is isolating, and you're looking at the best life of the people around you. It used to be if I didn't get invited to a party, I probably didn't even know the party happened. Now you see who was there and what they did, and you weren't included, right? That's
you
painful.
See it, and you see like every second of it. Mom, it's on Snapchat, it's on Instagram, they're TikToking and kick-cocking. You all know what I'm talking about because you got the app on your phone, and you're like, I'm here with Valerie, Jarrett. She's got on a white outfit. I see all of you over there looking at your phones.
That's okay. That's okay. You can post nice photos of me on my Instagram, which is a good place. Instagram is a much happier place than Twitter. Twitter is not that happy of a place. But this is, I guess, my point is that it can also be very lonely. And I wonder, I query to you, and I think parents can be very helpful with this. Are you learning the skills that it takes to be human and be empathetic and to look in the eyes of the person that you are talking to? Pete, right? It's probably the parents clapping. I think about that conversation I'd had with Michelle Obama. Would she have had the confidence to open up to me the way she did if her life was solely on social media? You have to have practice. I think about the first guy that dumped me. There weren't many, but there was this one guy. after he dumped me, I was a lot more empathetic when I dumped somebody.
Don't
right?
we always seem to remember that one.
You do remember it, and we didn't ghost people the way you all do. That's not nice. Don't do that. Don't do that. And I'm kind of saying it in a funny way, but I'm serious that I think that for young people particularly, it is challenging today. There's so much coming at you. You are exposed to all kinds of things. Even my daughter, who's 33, when we watch a movie together that's scary, she looks right at the movie. And I'm like covering my eyes and like this. And it doesn't bother her. Why? Because she's just seen an awful lot. And so you have to be kind to yourself. And I will say, if the one thing that enabled me to get through the challenges of my life and my career, particularly the years I was in the White House, is that I surrounded myself with people who wished me well. Good friends. Right? And you know the difference. I know you know the difference. And girls, sweethearts, can be a little nice nasty sometimes, right? Let those friends go. Let them go. Just let them go. And today, my closest friends are dear and good and love me. And when I've had a really bad day, they lift me up. And so people say, can you have it all? Is there balance in life? No, there's actually not balance. And no, you can't have it all at the same time. But the question is really, when you look back, as I have done, as Leslie mentioned, through my multiple chapters, was it a whole life? Did the chapters add up? Did you love? Were you loved? Do you feel like you made a difference? Did you empower your voice to help somebody who didn't have a voice? Did you look out for yourself? Because if you don't look out for yourself, you really, after you go out of your parents' home, you can't necessarily count on people always looking out for you. You got to learn to advocate for yourself. And that those are the kinds of questions I think I pose to myself. And so building relationships today, as you are in this room, with people who will be lifelong friends. I have a best friend from high school, a best friend from college, a best friend from law school, and about 5 more best friends. And I talk to them all the time. And it takes work. And I don't text them. I pick up the phone and I call them. Just like when you go to college, I want you to call your parents.
And not just when you need money. Call them just to say thank you for all those rules you imparted. Thank you for taking me to 5 different activities on the weekend. Moms, holla. I got a middle schooler, so thank you, Mom. Thank you, Mom. Do this, one of these. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Mom.
You'll see. You'll see. I was telling Leslie backstage, my daughter, who just had this baby, was bathing her baby the other day. Moms in the audience who have teenagers, you'll love this story. And she and her husband were bathing the baby together. And they were talking back and forth about what to do and turn him this way and turn him that way. And they were really struggling. And I walked up in the bathroom behind them, and my daughter looked at me and she said, "How did you do this by yourself?" Well, she appreciated me now. I can tell you that. It took 33 years, but she really appreciates me now.
I bet she does. We're gonna turn the microphone over to you to allow you to ask some questions. And as you're assembling at the microphones, can you leave our young people here with just a message at the end of a long week where they have been talking to their respective lawmakers about the state of this nation, what they want to see change, finding their voice around issues of importance? It can be hard in this climate to have that trademark cup of optimism, but I can see that experiences like this fill your cup. So how would you fill their cup with something positive about the state of our nation? And young people, feel free to go ahead and line up now at the microphones, okay?
Well, I will put it to you this way. My optimism comes from looking around this room at these incredible, talented, Black young people. And you're going to change the world. You are. And you are so much more sophisticated, better educated, better well-read than my generation was, because you have everything at the tip of your fingers. And I want you to take that incredible ability that you have and know your power, know your value, know that with your energy and tenacity, anything is possible. And it does begin with participating in this country. there's a lot of things about our country that we might not be happy with right now, right? There are some things I'm not happy with, but I can't just go in my corner and cry about it. Of the people, by the people, for the people requires engagement of the people. You have the most to lose. So do not sit on your hands. I am so proud that you came to Washington. Come back again and keep coming back. That's how change happens.
So now the young people want to have their voices heard. And why don't we start over here? Why don't you tell us your name and what chapter you're from, and you can ask your question.
Hello, my name is Clara Jones, and I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm in the Motor City chapter.
Hometown, yes.
And I just want to first off by thanking Miss Jarrett for all the stuff she's done for the U.S. and continue to do great things. My question for you is, what do you think the biggest point for my generation should focus on to keep our democracy going in the right direction?
Well, I think it's what we've been talking about. It's a good question to everybody here. What can your generation do? I say vote, but vote plus. Vote plus, do your homework and find out like who is actually running that reflects your values and priorities. Not who's cute, who gives a good speech, none of that. Who do you want to have dinner with and hang out? None of that is important. You need to find the person who you think is going to be fighting for your family, which means you have to learn about them. You have to be engaged. You have to send in questions and ask the campaigns what's going on. When they come to your town, go and talk to the people who are working with the candidate. Ask questions of the candidate. Be discerning and engaged in your civic participation. That's one. And then the second thing is, and I know all of you do this, you have to volunteer in your community to help somebody who needs a little help. And it could be tutoring at a local high school or a Boys and Girls Club. It could be an internship where you're volunteering in a local hospital. Whatever your passion is, do it. And I promise you, you will get back more than you give.
Thank you, Ms. Jarrett.
Yes?
Do you have a question?
Yes, so, okay, everyone can hear me? Okay, so I'm actually not a Jack and Jill member. I was a keynote speaker and MC for today for the rally. But my name is Nupal Kiazolu. I'm 19 years old. I'm the president of Black Lives Matter New York and also, see the crown and sash, Miss Liberia USA. And everything right now for me is so full circle, like seeing you, and I'm like trying not to cry because I'm like shaking. Whew, okay. I remember when I was 8 years old and I saw you on CNN and I remember saying that I'm gonna be just like her.
And now look at you. You got your crown on, you got your sash on. I didn't have any of that at 19.
And you just said something so profound, and you said to go beyond the expectations of others. And as a young civil rights activist who has aspirations to be in office and ultimately be the president in 2036, my question to you is, what is your advice to me as a young activist that's pursuing a career in politics? Because a lot of times people tell me, well, you're an activist and you're advocating for Black lives and oppressed peoples. How do you expect to be marketable to the rest of the country? So that's my question to you, like how would I navigate that?
This is really a good question, and I talk about this in my book. And thank you for being vulnerable and your leadership. But I say in my book that the immigration rights advocates should care about the LGBTQ community. The LGBTQ community should care about the immigrant rights community. The LGBT community should care about Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter should care about gender equity. I mean, we are all inextricably linked. And so I think when we frame our conversations in a way where people can hear and see us, I mean, one of the many strengths of what's happening with Black Lives Matter right now is the general population is being forced, because they wouldn't do it ordinarily, they wouldn't do it voluntarily, to look at what we all know happens in our community all along. And I can remember people coming up to me, white people, particularly in my hometown after Laquan McDonald was shot 16 times by the police. And they said, what's this talk that happens in the black community? They didn't know. Now, why didn't they know? Because we don't talk about the talk, right? Because it's hard to have to raise your sons to be scared and have to behave differently than their white classmates do. But this is not anything that's new in our community. It is new in the broader community, thanks to your activism and thanks to these cell phones.
Thank you.
And so my message to you is you just keep being you. And you keep trying to talk to people who may not be black and may not be in your sphere and explain to them in the most personal terms that you can why they should care about black lives. And it isn't enough to say all lives matter, because black lives are uniquely vulnerable and under attack right now.
Thank you.
Hello, Ms. Jarrett. I'm
Hi.
Elle Black from the Baton Rouge chapter, and as a young woman of color who's thought about going into a political career, I admire you immensely. So my question is, what was it like as a woman of color making your way through politics?
Well, see, it's interesting you use the word politics, because I always looked at it through the lens of service. And I felt that politics was really for the people who are in elected office. And yes, I had to think strategically to get things done that I wanted to do. But I tried to remind myself that it wasn't about just winning an election. It was about what you do after you win the election. And I think that's my true north. And I've tried very hard to hold on to that true north. And I'll give you just one short story, which is a long story in my book, but I'll give you the punchline. When the Affordable Care Act passed, after we had worked so hard to get it done, don't know why it had to be such a difficult thing to give affordable health insurance to all Americans, but in any event, late at night, we were on the Truman balcony of the White House having a celebration after the vote passed. And at about 2 in the morning, I walked over to President Obama and I said, how do you feel tonight compared to election night? And he looked at me, because he was Grant Park in Chicago was amazing. Everybody saw it all over the world. Really amazing night. And he was so happy that night. And he said, there's no comparison. He said, election night was just the means to get to this night. And I think if you look at service through that lens, that yes, you have to win an election, but not because you want to be president, but because you want to make sure that hundreds of millions of people have better health insurance. And that's how you should look at That's how people should look at politics. And if more politicians thought the way President Obama did, we would all be a lot better off.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Serena Matingu, and I'm from the Loudoun County, Virginia chapter. Earlier you said that when you were talking about voting rights, you have to have difficult conversations with people who have different ideas from you. How do you recommend us having those conversations with students in our high schools so that we prevent the further polarization of our nation in the future?
Well, that's a good place to start. It's such a good place to start because it's a safe place. And I think you should go to the administrators and the teachers in your high school and say, let's do this. We did this recently at the University of Chicago in the law school, where faculty facilitated conversation, and I did one on gun violence. And I had people who were from rural communities whose parents had guns because the police would be like a half an hour away, and they love their guns, and they're very annoyed about anybody saying take away even an assault weapon. And then I had another woman who didn't think that we should kill animals, and then everybody in between. And we came in the room saying the rules are we're going to listen and we're going to try to look at it from the other perspective. And the highlight for me of that session was when a young man said to a woman, I hadn't thought of that before. That's magic. I hadn't thought of that before. He admitted it, meant he was listening, and I'm not saying he changed his mind, but at least he had a different perspective. And so I think we should have clubs in our high school where people come and you agree on the ground rules when you walk in the door, that you're going to disagree, but without being disagreeable, and you're going to listen. And that it's okay, particularly at your ages, to change your minds. At my age, I change my mind when people make a good argument. So start right in your high school would be my advice. And be prepared to be uncomfortable. Life is pretty uncomfortable.
We've got about 4 more minutes.
I'm going to go fast.
Go ahead. Yes.
All right. My name is Lakaira Hobbs from the South Central region.
Southwest Suburban Dallas chapter. And I would just like to say, how do you feel about in the land of the free, home of the brave, I have to be brave and actually feel like I'm not free to go outside of my own home, and I can't go out and be like other children and play out in the street like in the 90s how they used to. I want to know, what is your opinion? I want to know.
Oh,
what
Lord,
is your opinion?
we're all. She doesn't even know how old we are. No, we're not making fun of your question.
Back in the
because it's
90s.
important.
I understand, but I just want to know,
No.
what is your opinion?
No,
on
it's a serious
such-
question.
Wait. Let's listen.
It's a serious question.
Let's listen.
Because I have to be scared of getting shot if I go out too late at night. I have to be scared of the fact that I can't go outside of my house because I might live in a dangerous neighborhood. I have to be scared of another race, all because I'm colored. So I want to know, what is your opinion on this matter?
Well, first of all, thank you. Good question. The reason why you get a chuckle out of me is because the 90s seems like a long, long time ago to you. But also I would say to you, objectively, crime is at a lower rate today than it has ever been. And so when you hear Republicans saying, well, we need to arm everybody and, et cetera, no, crime is down. The problem we have, and I'm so glad to see the orange shirts, the problem is we have too many darn guns on the street. If we got rid of a lot of those guns on the street, you would be safer. And the other thing I would mention to you about gun violence, and you guys know this, that 2/3 of the people who die from gun violence commit suicide. So this is a mental health issue. And your safety in the community should not be just a concern of everybody in this room, as I know it is. It should be a concern of everybody. And the way you stood here and talked about that is what I want you to do every chance you get with every person who's in a position of power. Explain to them that a young person in America, and the wealthiest country in the world, should not have to grow up in fear. So we just all have to rally together and figure out what we do to get guns off the street and create opportunity for young people who currently do not have opportunity. Every young person should have the kind of excellent education that many of you in this room are getting. Everybody should have an opportunity to go to college if they aspire to do so, to have a job where they can take care of their family. And the violence is a symptom of a lack of opportunity. And until we tackle that, we're going to continue to have violence in our communities. Thank you.
Proud of you,
Thank you so
for
much.
finding your voice and articulating that so well. Yep. This is going to be our last question.
I'm sorry, you three.
I know.
Hi, I'm Catherine Tucker. I'm from Morris County chapter, New Jersey. And I was wondering what experience in your career influenced you the most?
You know I'm old, so that's a lot of experiences I've had. Seasoned
like
is another
stew.
word. You know what I think changed my life dramatically? Having a child. Yeah. And I mean, I was kind of wandering through life. I would never have thought to come to Washington and been an activist and lobbied Congress the way you guys are doing. I wouldn't have. I mean, Jack and Jill, when I was coming along, was very just social, and that was important, but we weren't having any trips to Washington, I can tell you that. But when I had my daughter, this is kind of a good note to end on. When I had my daughter, my marriage was already a wreck. I married the boy next door, figuratively, in that our moms grew up in the same apartment building. Our fathers were friends. He was a doctor. My father was a doctor. I'd had a crush on him since I was 8 and he was 12. I know. What could go wrong with that marriage? Plenty. Plenty could go wrong with that marriage. And I got married. I'm glad we're ending it on kind of a personal note. I got married thinking that would make me happy. And I was looking for somebody to kind of complete me as opposed to completing myself. And you got to be whole before you have that much to offer somebody else. Make yourself whole first. And I was miserable because he was frankly not that into me. And I kept thinking, why aren't you making me happy? And I had my daughter for all the wrong reasons. I thought having a baby would, make our marriage work. A baby only adds stress to a marriage. So don't have a baby thinking your marriage will get better. But when I would look at her and I would say, oh my gosh, she's kind of counting on me to do something like where she might be proud. Well, first of all, she's counting on me to take care of her. And what do I know about taking care of babies? Nothing. When I had her and my husband was gone. And so, but more importantly than just like basically changing diapers and feeding her and stuff like that, keeping her alive, I wanted her to be proud of me one day. I did. I really did. And I knew that if I had stayed in the job that I was in, where everybody thought it was such a fancy, great job, I knew if I stayed there, I was just miserable, and that she wouldn't, and I wasn't even very good at the job. And I thought, she'll never be proud of me, but if I leave her every day, let me leave her to go do something that I care about. And I would take her to work with me, and I wanted to demystify where I was when I wasn't at home for her. And fast forward, the reason why it's fresh on my mind is when I started my book tour several months ago, my daughter came out with me and was interviewed, and somebody asked her, what did you learn about your mother in her book that you didn't know? And she said, I had no idea how guilty she used to feel as a mom because she was working. And she said, I'm so proud that she was working, and she became the model for me for what I should do. Not that she should do exactly what I should do, but that she should find her passion. And so the proudest thing I've ever done in my life was to raise a child that I not just love, but I respect and like.
And there's no better way to end this conversation where we think about the young people and their parents who are respected and loved. We should tell you that at the end of this conversation, there are books outside that have been donated by Jack and Jill that you can purchase that have been signed by Valerie Jarrett. Can we give Miss Jarrett a warm, rousing round of applause for making us feel a little more lifted and a lot more loved? Okay. All right. Now, if you can direct your attention to the screen, we're going to move forward with our second part of the program.
Hello, everybody. I just want to thank you for all the hard work you do day in and day out to educate our next generation of scientists, artists, and entrepreneurs. But no matter what career your students pursue in the years ahead, they're certain to be our next generation of citizens who'll shape the course of our communities and our country. And that's what I want to talk with you about today. Last year, I launched When We All Vote, a nonpartisan get-out-the-vote effort to help make sure everyone makes their voice heard loud and clear in our elections. In November, our country saw historic voter turnout, and that's progress we should celebrate. But even then, even in a record-breaking election, the portion of people who turned out to vote was still far too low. Only 1 in 3 of our youngest voters cast a ballot. That means 2/3 of these young people aren't showing up. Maybe they don't understand the issues well enough. Maybe they don't see how their vote will make a difference. Or maybe they just don't think their voices matter. Whatever the reason, it's up to us to flip that script, to show young people how crucial their voices are and how just a few votes can be decisive on issues that matter to them and their community. Obviously, we shouldn't be telling them how to vote or who to vote for. We just want them to vote, period. To take that first step toward making voting a lifelong habit. So I'm asking you to join me in helping make sure every eligible student is registered and ready to vote when the time comes. When We All Vote is here to help you do just that. And we want to help you make your school a voter registration hub for your entire community. We'll help provide the tools, the training, the support, and connections to make the efforts at your school a success. Because we believe registering to vote should be as timeless as homecoming dances or Friday night lights. Just text TEACH to 21333 to sign up and learn more about how you can help your students get registered. I hope you'll join us, because this is bigger than one party or one election. It's about empowering the next generation to make their mark on our future. So thank you again, for everything you do every day. I know you all don't hear that often enough.